Welcome to the Helmut Newton Foundation. Welcome to the Alice Springs Retrospective. We are here in the first room, called Early Years. It's actually the time before June took over with photography. It's about her, it's about him. 55 years story of love and life visualized here. We see her here in the first room with a geopard cheetah, owned by Brigitte Bardot. She lived around the corner in Saint-Tropez and frequently visited the Newtons in Ramatuelle in their summer house. She was always taking the camera and did some pictures of her husband and as well of other people coming by in Ramatuelle, in Paris and in other places where they lived. And the long wall with the small pictures, Helmut and June with his mutual portraits. It's quite funny to see her here in the first picture shooting with her camera into a mirror. Helmut on her side, biting in her shoulder, and she was just laughing and taking the picture. Both are naked. It's summertime in southern France, and you see this kind of natural nudity from the very beginning in the 60s and 70s in Ramatuelle, in the garden of the summer house. Helmut here with a model working. They go out and do some fashion shoots, and the next picture the same. So June was documenting Helmut at work. This is more or less the kickstart of the exhibition with the reciprocal portraits. June here in the house, at the open fireplace, in the garden. We see the couple in very private pictures. Later on, in the 90s, they decided together a common project called Us and Them. This project was a book and as an exhibition, and then traveling around Europe to Copenhagen, to Cologne, as well as Sao Paulo. And this was the first exhibition we opened the house with, our house, the Helmut Newton Foundation. Now we are in Paris. At the next wall, we see some pictures from the 60s. We are going a little bit chronological back in the years. They spent some time in Paris from 1961 onwards, as Helmut Newton got a job at French Vogue, and June, as a trained actress, had no chance to go back onto the stage. They continued to do these portraits of each other, and we see June and Helmut reciprocal portraits. And by the way, these prints are silver prints, lifetime silver prints, they brought into this common exhibition. At the last wall, so we're chronological back in the 40s and 50s, we see June as a model, here with a hat, as an actress, and we see June as June Brown. She was born as June Brown. As an actress, she took over the name of June Brunel. The first encounter with role play in the work of Helmut Newton happened exactly here in the 40s. This became later on in the work of Helmut Newton and Alice Springs a very crucial element, the role play. Everybody was going into a new role, into a new situation, all the people they photographed. At this wall, June in the portraits by Helmut, the very last picture is shot by June, Helmut at work in Salzburg in 1956. And this kind of amount represents a little bit the amount in our archive. We have much more photos of Helmut Newton shooting June, of course, than vice versa, but there are some of these portraits. June took already in the 50s. In the vitrine, you have some articles about June Brunel as an actress. She was a prize-winning, well-known actress, in Australia, in Melbourne at the stage. another role play, and some very funny photos Helmut Newton took of her, published in Adam magazine 64, as well the photos themselves, other contact sheets. Behind the vitrine, these very famous double portrait. June shot Helmut, Helmut shot June, both in Paris in 1962. Yeah, these portraits were used, especially by Helmut, as well as his passport picture in a very small format. Here's more the life-size prints. They decided to print in this size for the common exhibition, Us and Them. On the other wall, you see a single picture, the only color picture from 1951, June in the role as Salome. And this is, again, a very interesting thing that you see her here in a special role. So it's not June Newton, it's not the wife of Helmut Newton you see here, it's also June Newton as June Brunel, as Salome. The photograph between the windows showing June in the daylight studio in Rue Aubriot with her self-portrait painted by her. And this is a very important aspect in her work, as she was not able to do any acting anymore in Paris. I mean, she is a trained actress from Melbourne, and she speaks English, and there was a huge language barrier, of course, for the stage in Paris. So she started to paint, and we have some of the drawing in the big vitrine, at the end of the exhibition. And in the living room, we have one of her paintings, displayed, you will see in some minutes. If we go into the center field of this room, we see two very big size portraits, one shot by Helmut, one shot by June, of course. We see June here in the summer house in Ramatuelle, or close to Ramatuelle, in the year 64. This was the day as they bought the house. And this became a very crucial part in their life, a very important spot. They spent a lot of time there in the summer months, and as well as Paris crowded of the people, in the summer, they spent the time there, and vice versa. As everybody went into holiday, they went back to Paris then. A lot of pictures were shot there in Ramatuelle and at the Côte d'Azur. And opposite, it's Helmut in the Charles Eames chair in Rue Aubriot, where they live together. It's in a tiny little apartment in Marais district, which was by then not the chicest area. It's very funny to see these pictures here on the wall again. We showed these portraits and others as well in the year 2004 as we opened the house with this exhibition. And then you have these kind of réciproque portraits, June shooting him and Helmut shooting her in a plane. And this was kind of a moving scene, actually. Helmut worked really a lot in the 60s, and then he had a serious heart attack in New York in 1971. This was very serious. So he was in the hospital, June came over, and then the doctors said, all right, you will survive, you can go on, you will live. This situation that both of them photographed each other, in the plane back to Europe, back to our apartment in Paris. At the entrance area, these contact sheets, enlarged contact sheets, and we have, of course, as we have the whole archive of both of them, a lot of these contact sheets. The original ones are now scanned. Some of them were already enlarged by Helmut and June for exhibitions. Also these 4 ones from Côte d'Azur, from the Côte d'Azur area, and from the house area. And then, funnily, you see the contact sheet for the bigger format photograph, Helmut's portrait of June and Cheetah, the geopard. As well, other pictures. The very first one, it's private shots, including Charlotte Rampling, Jean-Michel Jarre, Jacques-Henri Lartigue, and others. So you will see some of them, some of these celebrities, a little later within the exhibition. And so you can see, these photos from the 70s, where, let's say, the beginning for other encounters and ending in portrait sessions for both of them. So sometimes it's important to know the people you're going to photograph later on. There's a special relationship between the photographer and the sitter, of course. And you see it here, starting with these very private pictures, shot in Ramatuelle by Helmut and June of these people. And then later on, the real portraits, hanging as well here on the wall. As the first room was just, let's say, the starter with the early years, we go now in the second room, and we start now with her photographic work. This here on the extra wall, you see an enlarged picture of a smoking man with somebody in the back, and this was her first picture. June was taking Helmut's role for an advertising campaign for Gitan cigarettes. So this was the year 1970. The person was waiting for the photographer, not knowing if it's a man or a woman coming by at Place Vendôme in Paris. So June let Helmut explain her the light meter and the usage of the camera even a little bit better. We saw that she was already using the camera before, but this was a little bit more important. She took this picture. This was published in a magazine as an advertisement. So the check came back home, and so she knew that she has a new business. And actually, it came under the name of Helmut Newton, of course, because nobody knew it. So her own work started with a replacement of Helmut Newton for this photograph, and we see the same model again here between the windows. So she shot a few pictures in 1970 at Place Vendôme of this person. But just one of these photographs were published as an advertisement. On the other wall, where you can see Fashion Paris 1970s, this is a group of works she did for Depeche Mode magazine, a kind of cool magazine by then. It's always a model, very centered in these kind of portrait-size photos. The fashion of the time, and she was commissioned by this magazine. It was not only Helmut Newton doing these fashion shots in these years, but as you say at the pictures, there are some completely different ideas. There are people around, it's a little bit crowded, and it's not really uneven. These are some elements Helmut Newton would never have done. But we see a very interesting spontaneity. It's quick, it's fresh. This is Alice Springs style, from the early 1970s on. These pictures you see here on the wall with the huge black frames and the bigger sizes were exhibited before in an exhibition from 2016 in our house already. So we have this source as well, not only us and them, also this source. And the other pictures, the smaller ones with the Passepartout, we found just recently in our archives. As you know, everything was brought back to our place now. And so we have the full archives of Helmut and June Newton and Alice Springs. So we found these 4-5 beautiful vintage prints, silver gelatine prints, which we just framed for this exhibition for the first time ever, with a little stamp on the back, her name, the photographer's stamp, Alice Springs, and with a little note that this is about heads and photograph for Stern magazine. So we know then from this envelope where these pictures were in, that she got this commissioned by Stern magazine. Helmut Newton worked a lot for this magazine, as you know, and she took these pictures. Very timeless, very elegant, very modern on the other hand. So this was early and mid-70s in this time. We did not have an incredible deep look into the new material, but these are some samples of the new material we just got. So this is more or less the second source. New prints, actually vintage prints. We are able to show it now for the first time ever. In the center of this second room, which is dedicated to fashion and nude photography, there's a great series she took, commissioned by Jean-Louis David, which is the Parisian hairdresser, legendary hairdresser. She got a kind of a carte blanche and took these pictures as advertisement for weekly magazines. So these were published full page in these magazines like Elle, Vogue, and so on in France. This was an incredible commission. And here again, as before in the photographs and the fashion pictures for Depeche Mode, you see here it's fresh, it's new, it's something else. It has nothing to do with Helmut. But funnily, Helmut Newton appeared in one of the pictures. You know, you see here at the end of the wall, between the windows again, Helmut is dressed as a nun. This is about Jean-Louis David. It's about the hairdresser. It's about all these products he is also offering, shampoo and all this stuff. And the two women, incredible juxtaposition and combination with the nun, and Helmut is playing the nun. So you see, again here, it's very funny what the role play means, you know, starting, let's say, in the 40s. And they had a lot of fun during these shots. The vitrine shows us something, you know, from her published work in magazines from the fashion world. It's covers of Elle magazine and Nova. And here in color, some other pictures from other magazines, black and white ones, as well as a series of pictures where we can see her with the models, and she was directing on the street, you know, what they have to do. And this is really interesting because it's everything becomes as a role play on one hand, but it's the street becomes a stage. Also in the vitrine, you saw some of her nude photographs who you see in some minutes, you know, behind another wall. Here again, we see some samples of the Jean-Louis David campaign, and actually there were even more ones, and the two women, one is giving a light to the other. It's kind of naughty by then, you know, in the early 70s, because it's actually a vote for lesbian love. They were very brave and very modern, let's say. The agency took over this very unusual idea of the visualization of hairdressing. And here again on the other wall with the 4 other samples in the shot for Jean-Louis David. Also again, very funny and great ideas she was taking. The photograph between the windows with a group of people was shot for Jean-Louis David, and this is a vintage print from the 70s, and we framed it here for the exhibition, and this is shown as well here for the first time in our exhibition rooms. If we go around this extra wall, you will see some nude pictures. They were shown before in other exhibitions, but not all of them, and not in this size. It's quite similar to the other wall we saw before with the advertisement for Gitane cigarettes. Sirpalane, more than life-size, so it's a little bit an homage to Helmut Newton, of course, who was inventing the idea of the life-size models. This is the same picture you found in the vitrine before as a cover motif. A group of 4 pictures. Pat Cleveland, a great model of the time, she undressed in front of June's camera. All these pictures were just done for herself. There was no commission by any magazine, but they were published later on in magazines. In French Photo, for example, also these new photos found their place in the magazines, but just later. It's interesting because Helmut Newton worked completely different. He was just shooting for the magazines as a Gern for Hire, as he called himself, and in June just took it, let's say, out of curiosity for herself. And in former exhibitions there were also some nude pictures of men. So here we see just female models, and the last one here, 3 pictures, 2 portrait format, 1 horizontal one. The right one of it, it's actually belonging to the other series of Jean-Louis David. So you can see that this nude model in this bathtub, it's not a real nude picture, but you can feel that June was just interested in bodies, in female bodies, and in the personality of the people, playing a role again. So she didn't make any difference between commissioned photography, commercial photography, fashion one, and nude photography. If we go into the next room, actually the master field of Alice Springs photography, it's portraits. Completely different portraits, but many of them are shot in the same manner. We have very well-known artists, photographers, writers, later on photos of the film scene and fashion scene and so on. Everybody has his own ego, but she was able to catch a very certain moment. She was not going there and shoot them with, let's say, several films or so on. There were just a few pictures of each of them, but very individual. So this is more or less a great clue, let's say, to her work, that she was catching a moment, looking into the face of the people, like here, Sebastião Salgado, or Helmut Newton with Richard Avedon, or again Jacques-Henri Lartigue. We saw him in the very early photos from Ramatuelle, as you remember. This was the 70s. This is a shot from Antibes in 84. So there was friendship, there was a kind of a kinship. This is really interesting that she was able to photograph her photographers, colleagues, and then reduce these emotions, let's say, to a certain amount. So again, Helmut with Gibson, and then these are 2 brothers from Spain. Then we have a Chris von Wangenheim, who died very early, he was a close friend to Helmut's. This is a studio portrait, as you can see in the background. Very unusual for June. Normally she went on to the places of the others and photographed them on site, in situ, at their places. And then we have Sheila Metzner with 2 of her daughters, and this is a great portrait with 2 of them in profile, and one's looking into the camera, so opening the field to us. How the people look back on June through her camera and now on us. This is very interesting and very moving in a way. If you come by, see the show, so you will have an incredible encounter with the people you see here just photographed by June. As all our exhibitions, also this show will be traveling in Germany and around the world. So it was Robert Mapplethorpe, Manuel Alvarez Bravo, and Peter Huger with these great portraits. Some of them are so representative for them that they were used by them in different occasions, So for example, if they were doing a book on her own work, they were using some of these portraits as well for their book. For example, Pansement. This is the 3rd one here on the artists, starting with Beuys, Gerhard Richter, and then Pansement, shot in the Louvre and in Paris. So he was using this portrait as his representative portrait. And then we have Niki de Saint-Phal, Bernard Fries, and so others. So what I did here in this exhibition is I was grouping, let's say, the professions of the people, the writers, the photographers, the artists, and we have here the artists all together, photographed in the 70s and 80s. Some of her works, of these early works, she started actually in mid-70s with her portrait photography, were published in a volume by Éditions du Regard José Alvarez, who had first an advertising campaign and who commissioned her for several fashion jobs, and then later on had published as well her work, in book form, with these portraits. And then later on other publishers took over. Her work became well known actually in the 80s. So there's Gerard Gouroux on this extra wall, and Hans Hartung and RT, and several of these photos were published again and again, as well on different occasions. They were exhibited in exhibitions, and Helmut and June did a show together in the National Portrait Gallery in London in '88. They went on with a common idea for the publication Us and Them, so which we saw at the very beginning in the first room, early years, and which we will see as well in the last room of the exhibition with the juxtaposition of the two photographs. We see here more or less emotionless pictures, looking very open, very frankly back into the camera. It is as she would have been doing meditation with some of these people. We don't see so many accessoires. In the former time of portrait photography, the people were, let's say, represented by some accessoires, a camera, let's say, or a sculptor has some material around. June went another way. She was just photographing them as a personality. And so therefore we could change, some of the people from the photographer side to the artist side or the writers, as we see in some minutes. But it's not represented by something. We have some exceptions, but this was not used very often by June. Here with the two big size portraits, it's a mirror selfie by June looking into a mirror, and there's Marie Deschamps and José Alvarez here with the beard. So he was of great help for June and for Helmut, of course, a close friend. He just recently published a biography on the two of them, a close friend for decades, let's say, and he published also one of the books of Helmut Newton later on. So it was not only June who published with this publishing house Éditions du Regard, it was also Helmut. On the other side, the famous portrait in Hotel Volney in New York, Helmut is shooting June from behind, but and as well looking into her face, is hiding behind the camera, and it's again here a mirror selfie. And what's very interesting here is the pictures within the picture, and June is hiding one picture on the wall, and there's another painting, hanging on the wall, and then we have the screen of the television set. So it's very interesting to see the two of them. We have plenty of these portraits. Helmut's shooting June and June is shooting Helmut, and also these two pictures were a part of the Us and Them project. So as you can see, the whole show is a kind of a mix out from the three former projects, Us and Them, the first exhibition, June Newton, Alice Springs photographs from 2010. She took together and she curated on her own work and with her own work, and another one was 2016, the MEP show, the Maison Européenne de la Photographie show from Paris, which we took over. And the last source is, as I said before, the vintage prints we found in our archive, and which is here now interwoven with the other portraits, with and without the Passepartout. All of these prints we did, for the exhibitions, and sometimes silver prints, sometimes inkjet prints, as we work with as exhibition prints for exhibitions like these. Now we are here in the last corner of this room. Actually, if we went in, this is the first group of people you're confronted with, writers, authors, also from the 70s and 80s, as you can see here on the wall. So it's Antoine Blondin, and then you see Bruce Chatwin and Alberto Moravia, Christopher Isherwood, some others. And here again, none of them, but just one of them, let's say one of them is just represented a little bit with some paper and a pen and so on. So he might be a writer, he might be an author, but all the others could be have a completely different profession, but as we all know, we marked it as well here on our tiny little captions directly on this wooden bar. Yeah, who was who? Alberto Boavi at the end, or opposite, it's Christopher Isherwood and William Burroughs and Lawrence Durrell. And it's fantastic to see how June is able to open the people for her view, for her sight on them. These portraits became incredible, timeless portraits, and how the people look back on us within the room as we are a visitor, it's really fantastic and incomparable with any other photographer. She had a clue, to open the people, and I guess that's all about her knowledge about acting. She knows what it means, staying in front or behind the camera. She is able to open the people, probably with some of these sentences, that she is able to catch this emotion, this very neutral emotion of the people. We already saw some of the portraits from the 70s and 80s in the other rooms. And here in the huge room, the biggest exhibition room, we see many more of June Newton's Alice Springs portraits. Some of them in color, some of them in black and white, mostly in black and white. The color ones are from the exhibition of 2010, which we did before here at the foundation, 4 women's portraits. It's Ariana Huffington, it's Danielle Mitterrand, it's Anna Mahler, and Lynn Wyatt. So 4 women, she shot for different magazines, including Talk magazine and Vanity Fair and so on and so on. So, and later on, she decided to print these as well, almost life-size. Sometimes a kind of a funny experience in the case of Danielle Mitterrand, as we all know that Mitterrand had some other girlfriends. And the former first lady of France, with a very funny look back into June's camera, as she would be sisters, best friends, and so on, as she would know everything about her husband, in the back as a painting, on the wall. And Amala under one of her sculptures. And so this is sometimes represented by their own work, sometimes represented by people around, in the case of Danielle Mitterrand, and the last one, Lynn White, and she's a socialite, in southern France, very rich lady. She spends a lot of money for social welfare aspects and culture. And yeah, June was commissioned to photograph all these women for the magazines. At the other wall, we see black and white photos without any passepartout. It's a fashion industry. And here again, we see people without nearly any emotions. Huberti Givenchy, Anthony Lopez, Alaya, Eva Wallen, the model, Yves Saint Laurent, and so on. Sometimes these pictures were published in magazines like Egoist or in other magazines like Vanity Fair, and then used as well for themselves. Some of them got a print, and they used it for some other ideas. Azedine Alaya, in the row below, he's almost smiling back into June's camera. So there is a special relationship we can see and feel. Beside this, Yves Saint Laurent with this dark hazel, and with an incredible body language, let's say. And so there is no critique or something like this in these kind of portraits, but we could describe some of these as well as psychological portraits. We see Sonia Riquiel and Gautier, and one of the vitrines we see that this shoot was done for Wolkenkratzer magazine, which was a very good magazine by then in Germany, an art magazine, and this was a cover story. On the cover there is the portrait in color, and within the story it's a black and white, so he was using, like Helmut, at these kind of jobs, he was working with two cameras. One was loaded with a film with a black and white, and one was loaded by the color film. Here other fashion designers, sometimes with the mother. In the case of Castelbajac and Karl Lagerfeld, we see it's Ugaro, it's James Galanos, Diana Reeland, Leon Talley, the last picture. This was, by the way, the most expensive photograph, which was sold by June on an auction just recently for more than $30,000. Most of them are exhibition prints, of course. These with the passepartout and this with the black frames, silver prints we just found and we never shown before in an exhibition of Alice Springs. Designers here, female designers, and Betty Jackson from England wearing their own designs. Then we have Caroline of Monaco with her son Andrea. Karl Lagerfeld on the side. It's one of my beloved pictures. I love it a lot because of the composition, the lighting. The next is Roberto Bouville. It's a Spanish architect, and it's kind of unusual for June with this radical lighting, and just the teeth are blinking. Fantastic. And the others are, again, with this kind of neutrality and the emotion. And the last one is kind of an encounter of these two men. Opposite the fashion industry wall, which I call it that way, we see the film industry wall. It's a wall with different portraits she took of Fanny Ardant, Jean-Jacques Annaud, Leeson, Fellini, and so on different occasions. Mostly she shot in France and in Hollywood, but sometimes as well in Italy, in the case of Fellini. She was living a very social life together with Helmut, and with lunches and dinners all the time, and meeting all the people, And sometimes it was quite helpful, I guess, that she was able to meet these people, and then later on she took the portraits also of them. We see Claude Chabrol here with a tiny little emotion, and it's very funny and very open here again. Perrier on the side, Everett on the other side. So bigger prints, almost life-size prints here, all with the passepartout. Opposite we had this without the passepartout. This is because of the different sources of the exhibitions we had already here done, and we have these prints in this stage in our archive. So we are able to add the smaller portraits here with the black and white ones, with the framing, with the passepartout, which were not shown before. Agnes Varda, Tavernier, Jean Moreau, and we saw in one of the vitrines early on this picture of Jean Moreau, this portrait for German Vogue magazine, for example. So another commission, and Christopher Lambert at the end, another commission she took over, from a magazine, from, for example, Vanity Fair and several other ones. Following this wall, this is a very long wall, it's almost 10 meters. We have another 6 people from the film industry. It's Ridley Scott, Tony Scott, Anu Gamay, Fellini again. So sometimes you see the same person twice if it's a completely different expression. We saw it with Robert Mapplethorpe and here with Fellini, Vittorio Gassman. It's Wim Wenders with Yuichi Yamamoto, and Wenders did a film on this fashion designer. So it's merged a little bit the professions in a portrait like this. So I put this picture here on this wall. Let's go on to the other room department here. It's a tiny little series we see here on the side between the windows. It's quite funny. In the year 91, a series was published, and we have actually more than these 4 images. It was in Mr. magazine, and it's about exhibitionism. So actually there are 2 actors, 1 actress and 1 actor, and they're playing around with this idea of exhibitionism. So this guy meets this woman, and shot in the second picture, with this kind of weird expression. He opens his coat, and then she answered, opening her coat as well. So one exhibitionist meets another one. Within the vitrine, this magazines, including the exhibitionism series, but as well others, a story about her as a photographer and a person, samples from Marie Claire with the designers shot by June, wearing her own dresses. Edwin Moses, the sportsman, on the ball in the back, 5 portraits of ballet dancers from Monaco. It was not only Helmut Newton who was commissioned by Caroline of Monaco, shooting the dancers and the others and the people around for the program brochures. It was also June in the year 1902, and she did this brochure, and then she did these beautiful silver prints, on the side, and then we are going to present this here for the first time in that show. Here on the side, it's Bijou Philippe, a model and an actress, shot for Talk magazine in the year 2000 in LA. So we have here the photos from the 90s, 80s, 90s, and the zeros so-called in this big room with its green walls. And now we go into the last 3 rooms, and we have these 2 corridors, as you all know. And so we enter this space. This has again something to do with the project Us and Them, because we see some portraits from this common exhibition. Here with Helmut's portraits. She took a lot of portraits of Helmut, as you know. Over the years, some were published in her own book, or other were used in different contexts. The first one here on the left side, you saw already in the vitrine. It was for the Passion magazine, a magazine about Paris, and this was shot in southern France in the late 70s. On the side from Miami, and the last one as a fashion picture. Helmut became a fashion model from 2002 for Vogue Homme. On the other side, it's Helmut camouflaged, more or less, with high heels and June's hat, posing on the balcony of the Comment apartment in Monaco in the 80s as well. A portrait from the common project Us and Them. And the last 3 portraits June took of Helmut here together with Mugler, Thierry Mugler, in Paris, on a roof, close to Centre Pompidou. It's about this kind of photographing each other. June as a third part, we're photographing the 2 guys who were photographing each other. And as you all know, Helmut worked a lot for Thierry Mugler from the 70s on, and Again, in the 80s, in the 90s, there was a huge exhibition on Thierry Mugler in different cities, the last one in New York. And so this shot was as well part of that exhibition. And on the side, we see Helmut on the ground photographing Lisa Lyon, bodybuilding world champion by then in the early 80s. He is shot in Venice, California. And this photo he takes here, very well-known photo in his own work. So we see here a documentation of something by Helmut and then getting into his own work and becoming an icon. And June was very often around as Helmut did his shootings, and what I really like is the encounter here with Thierry Mugler on the side, and this is as well part of the huge Thierry Mugler show. In the back room, we call it the back room, it's the juxtaposition of two portraits all the time. The same person is portrayed by two photographers. One is Alice Springs and the other one is Helmut Newton. And this is a very crucial part of us and them. In this case, the them part. In the very early rooms, in the first room with the early years, we saw this mutual portray the us part of this common project, and here we see the second part. We see here more or less the same person, two facets of the same personality actually, and sometimes we can't believe that's the same person. We're starting here with the Gloria von Town and Taxis, shot on the left side by Helmut, on the right side by June. So these pictures were shown before. It was our first exhibition. The show was traveling, and the book was published on the occasion of this exhibition. And so some people were warning them to, if they should do a project like this, together with a very free and befried self-portraits, mutual portraits, and then these photos from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Sometimes we see the same person, and there are some years in between the two shootings. Sometimes it's the same year. The case with Karl Lagerfeld, there are some years in between. On the right side, it's the shot by Helmut. Karl Lagerfeld still here with a beard, and he photographed him again and again and again, and he decided to companion this photo with the one of June. It was their decision, they were able to get into their archive and to select from different shootings, of course, and they decided for these pairs, always the same person. The next is Brigitte Nielsen, the actress, and she was the wife of Dolph Lundgren, and there's a very famous portrait Helmut took of the two of them. So we see her here as a mother with a kid, presenting the kid as a gift in a way, shot by June, and she naked in a Hotel Hermitage in Monaco, in this kind of luxurious surrounding. And so we have completely different aspects of the same person and personality in front of us. The same for Dennis Hopper. You see the picture Helmut took, as he was looking into a script. Of course, it's a mise en scène. Of course, it's an enactment. He's playing a role. He's playing his role in a way. And on the other side is just Dennis Hopper as a private person. She would go out just walking the dog or going to the trash can. And so this is really funny to see some of these pairs, together and speaking about the same person. And this was a project that was never done by anybody before. Photos from the 80s and so on, as a photographer's couple. And the latest in this room, you can decide on your own who was actually the better portrait photographer. I mean, if you ask this question, on one hand, it's a little bit silly to ask a question like this, but on the other hand, it's you can decide yourself. It's where the intimacy goes within this kind of portrait photography, or the representative idea is behind. Hanna Schigula here, and the next is Caroline of Monaco, the princess. up from Monaco, with a famous harbor, and on the other side, just a mother with her kid, in this case, her son Andrea. And so this juxtaposition is something very, very special. It was not done before. Ettore Sozza is a close friend of both of them. We have in our archive a lot of handwritten notices and postcards, letters, and so on, with drawings, from sending to both sides. Yeah, it's interesting to see that both of them photographed him here. And in the apartment in Monaco, there were a lot of furniture designed by Ettore Sozza, the Memphis design furniture bought by Helmut and June. The last on this row, it's Jane Birkin, shot by June here on the left side in Venice at the Lido. I guess it was, during the film festival. June and Helmut went there several times and doing some shootings. The right one was shot by Helmut. So this is a pair where you can see not so much difference between these two expressions. As you know, Jane Birkin died, and as we have these kind of social media, we did a post on this these kind of rest in peace. A post was one of the most liked ones we ever had. So we decided for our poster motif the portrait June took of Charlotte Rampling, the right one here you see in this pair. So the left one was shot by Helmut in 73 in Arles, or just a little later. So there was a very famous picture, his first nude photograph of somebody, and this was this. Charlotte Rampling here in 82, shot by June, became our poster motif, and you saw her already in the first room, and there was this kind of friendship, we can call it friendship, between the couple, Helmut and June Newton, and Charlotte on the other side. So it's going on and on with these kind of pairs. And actually within the project, us and them, there are even more. In the vitrine, you can see the book, which was published first by Scarlo, then took over by Taschen, in the same size, and now being in a pocket version, coming out by Taschen again. So all these pairs are published in this book again. So it's with the help of the publisher, we can bring Helmut and June Newton's work out to the world. Here on the other side, on this wall, we have Violeta Sanchez, and of course it's obvious who was the photographer of the left picture and who might be the one of the right one. Of course it's Helmut left and June Newton, Alice Springs right, and then again with David Harkney. Here is the left one shot by Helmut, and the right one was shot by June. Not so different, like others. The same for Tina Chow, a model and wife of Mr. Chow, a very famous restaurant owner in LA and in several other places. And she was a fashion designer herself. She died of AIDS later on, and Helmut and June met her again and again in LA as they were going to Hollywood and spending their time in Chateau Marmont from 1980 or 82 onwards. It's interesting to see many of these people, shot in California and others in France. So these two places, where the Newtons lived, were the places for the shootings. And very interesting here is the double portrait of Yves Saint Laurent and Pierre Berger on the left side, shot by June. And this was used again and again by the two of them, as a representative portrait. And this hangs as well in the Yves Saint Laurent headquarters in Rue Morceau in Paris. On the right side, it's a later shot, years later, a decade later, shot by Helmut and Pierre Berger outside the balcony and Yves Saint Laurent inside. So this was shot just a little bit before the book came out. One of the next one is, again, it's fantastic to see this incredible different encounter with Catherine Deneuve, the right one shot by Helmut for Esquire magazine in 76, the left one 84 by June. And of course, it's a meeting of two women, of befriended women on the left side. You can feel it, you can say it. And the right one, it's about, of course, about the seduction. It's a role Catherine Deneuve plays in front of Helmut Newton's camera. Thierry Mugler 2 times, the left one shot by Helmut, the right one by June. Yeah, we saw him already outside in the portrait room together with Helmut, and the left shoot was probably done at the same moment as June shot the two of them. It's quite funny because, everything fits together within this last exhibition room. And within the vitrine, you see some publications of June. She did from the 80s, actually 80s on, exhibition catalogs and books for the book market, 2 publications from Egoist magazine. And so this was a forum where she published her portraits, very often also on the cover. And the last ones you see here in that room are again Gianni Versace here on the left side, shot by June. And what I really like is the 2 bags, meeting each other. This from the tailor's figure on the left side, the designer himself on the right side, plus the nude Helmut Newton took of him in his villa in Lago di Como. Angelica Houston, the daughter of John Huston, and a model by the time, shot by Helmut left side and June right side. This could be vice versa, actually, because you don't see any mise en scène in Helmut's photo, and a bit mise en scène and a little bit enactment on the right one. In both photos you see this kind of acting, and June's shot was used as the cover of her portrait book published by 12 Tree Publishers in California. And finally, it's Rudi Gernreich, the inventor of the bikini and monokini, just some weeks before he died. Both photographers took this picture in California. And again, it's these kind of encounters approached in the work of both of them. You see here sometimes a little bit psychological portraits, sometimes it's just this kind of cliche and questioning the cliche in the work of Helmut Newton, of course, sometimes a little bit exaggerated, like in his other photo of the fashion industry and so on. Yeah, these very calm, open portraits June took, Alice Springs took of the others. And June didn't make any difference between the social status of the people she photographed. You can see it in her publications, you can see it in this exhibition as well, in the former ones. Here we have this kind of cultural jet set, of course, but in her work we see many other people, like the Hells Angels or punks on the street and so on. So everything was shot by her in the same manner, in the same out from the same curiosity for the people. Here in the center of the room, again, the vitrine is placed, and with several publications. The 2 publications I already mentioned, the 2 from 2010 and 2016 of these exhibitions made by Taschen, and other smaller ones here in the vitrine. 2 of the Egoist covers, with their photos. And then there's a funny article, What Makes the Newtons Click? It's an article about both of them. Why and how they take their portraits, and then the spread of the publication, Us and Them, the cover with a photograph, it's a mirror selfie of June. We see in a minute, it's a very famous picture as well here on the wall, and another spread in this case with David Byrne. We can see here these kind of pairs of people. It's very astonishing to look at the visitors as well, discussing the different approaches of the 2 photographers, showing the same person. So we find a lot of different ideas in June Newton's Alice Springs photography and her portraits. Sometimes it's a pose, sometimes it's nothing like this. And so she leaves completely the individuality of the sitters. So this is kind of rare, because normally a portrait photographer has a kind of an idea, a special idea, to take a picture and fulfilling the wish and the commission of a magazine, let's say, and to add, let's say, another picture, fulfilling the cliche of the people, the image of this famous person. And June did a completely different way. She did it her own way, because she was able to take the same level for all of them, nearly all of them, nearly without any emotion. And even if it's a punk on the street or somebody famous like Yves Saint Laurent or Claude Chabrol. Here in this room compartment, a series called Melrose Avenue. She took in 84 in LA, where they lived, the first months of every year in Hollywood at Chateau Marmont. And then here again, it's a project she just did for herself and then published in her own book. This was not published in a magazine, this was just her own work. And sometimes she did such series. Actually, it's a bigger one, compiling probably 15 or 18 works. So I selected here 5 of them because I think it's a very important series of her work, showing as well something else besides all these celebrities. So we have the music scene, the punks, the hip-hoppers, and some other music with the ghetto blaster here, with the hip-hop dance and the break dance here on the street. So she was an observer of all the scenery, and in the last picture we see this smiling young woman looking back into her camera. So there was already communication without any word. So she became a witness of the scene, and she took these pictures of the scenery, which is of course now not there anymore. These were the 80s in LA. Here another group of 6 works from our archive, new pictures with Michel Foucault on the left side, published in Vanity Fair, for example, and Helmut Middendorf, Robert Mapplethorpe again, Patrice Trigano, the gallerist, and to others. These portraits sometimes were taken for magazines like Vanity Fair and others, and sometimes they were just taken of herself as a free project, let's say. Sometimes in her work it's this approach, and sometimes it's another. Yeah, and she did a lot of work for her own, let's say, and then she led the lab doing these silver prints. She never did this on her own. Entering the space, you're confronted on the left side between the windows with a group of 4 pictures, which is kind of interesting because we have a portrait on the left side and then kind of a black space, on the right side. And I just found these images very astonishing, I guess. And then I also found an advertising campaign, which is now in the vitrine opposite. And then you can see this was shot by June as a campaign for brasseries in Paris. And these were used for billboards and for magazines and so on. Also in the vitrine, you see some more of her publications, including a huge story in Zeit magazine on her with a text of Klaus Honnef, with German Vogue with Jean Moreau, and the cover story on Gautier of Wolkenkratzer magazine. And on the side, some tiny little publications she did on different occasions, including London, Bratislava, and so on. And the last series you see here on the left side, this is very moving because it's just mentioned here with the advertisement Los Angeles 2004. This is a series she took, again replacing Helmut Newton. Helmut Newton died 23rd of January, and everything was set for him to shoot these 3 women and as well some others. And it's an advertisement for deodorant. It's quite interesting because she took over his position again, and this marks more or less the end of her work. Just afterwards, Helmut Newton died already. She took just a few snapshots, some other portraits and self-portraits as a shadow. The start of her career was a replacement of him, and the end of her career was more or less the same. And the last room we go into, it's dedicated to her self-portraits. As we saw before in the first 3 rooms in the exhibition in her retrospective, there are these mirror selfies. And so I put here together 6 black and white photographs she took on different occasions and different places over the decades, starting in the 70s with Sirpa. She is the nude model we saw before in the other rooms, this one enlarged, huge as a Walker motif, life size. And we see June here again with her looking into a mirror. It's a kind of a self-proof, doing it again and again over the decades. In Melbourne, in Hollywood, in Paris. And the last one we see on the left side here. These mirror selfies, if you would like to call them this way, it's a proof of herself. We see it in the work of Helmut Newton, as well as in her work and in other photographic works too. The last one here you see on the left side, it's quite interesting and funny to see her 2 eyes and the third eye, the camera lens as the third eye, as the camera is always or sometimes called. It's a fantastic portrait shot in New York in the year 2000. And finally, on the right side, there is a vitrine with some of her drawings. As I said before in the first room, there was a time in the 60s as June was just doing paintings and drawings, and we found these drawings now in her estate as we brought everything over to Berlin. Now is everything here, and so we see some of her self-portraits and some portraits of Helmut. It's quite funny, and 2 of these awards are placed here too. On the left side, it's June as a self-portrait in the year 2004 with a spider by Louise Bourgeois in the flat in Monte Carlo. And if we go to the last room, which we called before June's room, we see June here with this very colorful dress. And that's quite funny because Helmut was asked to do some proofs of new color films, and then he asked her to have the most colorful dresses, just that he can prove his color films. And this is one of these examples. And we place this photo here because we are now going into the new called living room with one of her paintings opposite the entrance. It's cheetah again. We found this animal, in the first room. We will find the painting behind June's portrait as well in this room. You have to know that this room, which was called before June's room, now the living room, was meant as the apartment of Helmut and June because they wanted to live in their museum when they come to Berlin. So in this case, we transformed it back into an apartment, so the visitors can actually just go until here. But we are opening it now for you virtually to see this kind of mix of high and low. The chair designed by Gary, then some other furnitures and parts of her art collection. Then we see the cow, which was in the back motif of Helmut's shot of June. The shelf designed by Ettore Sozzas. We found before the two of them as a portrait. Liechtenstein, the interior picture, it's a lithograph. The Wesselmann, the reclining lute on the wall, the Godzilla, the Olivetti typewriter, in the left corner, the lamp designed by Andre Puttmann, and her portrait taken by June in the exhibition, and so on. Everything is connected somehow. A gun for hire display with words Helmut Newton used for himself. This was placed as well in their apartment somewhere. Under June's painting of Cheetah, you find the Franz von Stuck sculpture of the Amazon and another lamp by Ettore Sozzas, parts of their library and parts of her collection, including Christo, Ed Ruscha, Arno Rink, Ettore Sozzas, Renato Guttuso, and others. Just some samples. We end here facing the Sumo book, the huge book Helmut Newton did with Benedict Taschen, 1999. And we found within the exhibition the photographer, his publisher, Benedict Taschen, and the auctioneer, Simon de Paris, after the auction of this book, signed by all these celebrities in the book. And it was sold in an auction for more than 600,000 Deutschmarks. Became the most expensive book in the 20th century, which is quite funny. So everything gets together here with the last room, we saw before in the exhibition. This room will stay, and this will always be now the end point, the next exhibition and the following one. So it's great to see and to have this living room where the two of them with their style are represented. Of course, it's also June Newton with her style. I sometimes visited June in Monte Carlo, and we were sitting on these red sofas in the real apartment in Monaco, and now getting back to Berlin. June is now part of the Helmut Newton Foundation. If you come by, see the show, so you will have an incredible encounter with the people you see here just photographed by June.